What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking college football. And today we are breaking down the Kentucky Wildcats ahead of 2025. Before we get started, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. All that helps us a ton. Got a lot of support from you guys over the weekend. So thank you. I appreciate that a lot. And disclaimer, we're going to be talking about these teams well in advance. This is May 5th. The transfer portal is just closed. That's only entering. I would guess Kentucky picks up at least a guy or two before the regular season starts. If I miss something, leave it in the comments. Always trying to get better. And I appreciate anyone that disagrees. Just if you do, tell me why. But let's dive into Kentucky. They had a down season last year compared to the last few years, and actually just a lot of the Mark Stoops tenure. You can see the efficiency metrics. There's plenty outside the top 100. The offense overall collapsed. Their O-line was outside the top 100 in both pass blocking and run blocking. Pass game outside the top 100, some of that due to injury. Defense also took a step back, especially up front, and they had to slow down their offense a ton. They didn't pass very much. It was sort of neutered, for lack of a better term, under Bush Hampton. And all of this is in stark contrast to what we've seen from Kentucky of late, even a 4-8 season. First time they missed a bowl since 2015. Obviously, the first losing season in a while. They did technically have a losing record in the 2020 COVID season, but that's not one we can talk about without an asterisk. So Mark Stoops is back for his 13th season. His current record is 67-73. Overall, it's been a pretty good body of work for him, but with NIL, in the changing landscape, Kentucky's become probably even a harder job to win at. It's just not a team that focuses as much on football as some other SEC teams. Obviously, there's the basketball component with them being a blue blood there. But one of the best assets, I guess, to Stoops' game is his ability to attract good coaches and develop talent, which brings me to Bush Hampton, who, there's no other way to put this, completely face planted in the first year, taking over from Liam Cohen. The offense was absolutely dreadful last year, and they were 64th the year prior. So going from 64th to outside the top 100 is a huge problem. Now, that wasn't the only factor. O-line had a bunch of change. They will again this year. They changed QBs. They brought in Brock Vandegrift, who obviously didn't work out. He's now retired. And they had transfer running backs. So there's a lot of talent that left a program that Bush Hampton had to work with, new talent that is. But the problem I have with him is his recent track record is awful. He ran Boise State's offense into the ground. He used Ashton Genty in a timeshare with George Holani, who went undrafted. And he also used Taylon Green, current all-conference QB, in a rotation at Boise State. Don't trust his ability to identify talent. He runs a scheme, and he's not great at putting players in position to succeed when they don't fit the scheme. We'll see if they were able to replace some of these players and get guys that actually fit the Bush Hampton offense. But that's my first concern. Defense, not a concern whatsoever. Brad White's been there for a while. They did drop last year from 28th to 70th. But since he's been there in 2019, his track record is long enough where I'm willing to give him the benefit of a doubt and hopefully see this bounce back. As we get to recruiting and their talent acquisition, they're at the bottom of the SEC, but still usually in the top 30. That's kind of just the components of the SEC. Most of the conference is recruiting at a top 20 level, and half of it's top 10, top 5. So they come in 14th, 13th, and 12th in the last 3 cycles. All that's right around the top 30. Their retention, it's good for the most part. They had a blip on the radar in 23. Only 37% of that class is still with the team, but Kentucky's been a pretty good developmental program for the most part. Haven't struggled to keep guys around, so I tend to lean more towards the blip on the radar than anything else. They are pretty good in the transfer portal. They've recruited the 10th class this year, the 21st class last year, and the 14th class in 2023. So some of these gaps in recruiting they have been able to fill with the portal, but obviously that comes with some volatility evidenced by Brock Vandegrift, which brings me to the roster. So here is our 2 deep depth charts. Working on this constantly in the offseason. It's currently available in the Discord. I'll link that below. But 2 deep, so backups and starters, how they rank experience-wise, so the year, whether they're a graduate student or redshirt, whatever, snaps the last 2 years. They're recruiting in terms of star ranking and then a value score. The value score takes in your recruiting first, and then the more snaps you play, the less it looks at recruiting, the more it looks at on-field play. So we start at the QB position. Brock Vandegrift retires. The former Georgia elite recruit wasn't able to get it done with Kentucky, and now they move to a player who's sort of the opposite. Vandegrift's this huge elite recruit, couldn't play at Georgia, which is more just a bug in the system there. They're going to have a 5-star every cycle, basically. So he comes to Kentucky with no experience, but the recruiting face plants. Now we have the opposite. We have a player who started for basically 4 seasons, but it comes at a low level of competition for the most part in Zach Calzada, and he's a 3-star. With Calzada, you have to go all the way back to Texas A&M in 2021. He started there. This is a Jimbo Fisher-led A&M, so it was kind of a disaster. Completed 56% of his passes, 6.7 yards per attempt, 17 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 19 big-time throws, and only 11 turnover-worthy plays. Not a big runner, but that's a decent body of work for a QB in the SEC. We're talking the best competition in the world. I was honestly very surprised that he transferred all the way down to the FCS with this body of work. Yeah, it's not the best, and he certainly wasn't even close to the top half of the SEC in terms of quarterbacks. But positive TD to INT, positive big-time throw to turnover-worthy play, decent efficiency. Going all the way to the FCS was a surprise, and then once he was there, tore it up. It's very hard to translate FCS stats up to the SEC, but we do have something to fall back on in the fact that he did play decently in the SEC when he was young. I tend to think he's actually a little bit underrated. And I think people, at least that I've seen, I'm not in the weeds with the actual Kentucky fan base. I don't live there, obviously. Not sure what the talk is down there. But it seems on the internet, people thought Vandegrift was a better prospect than Calzada, and I'm not sure I'm willing to go that far. Behind him, Cutter Boley's back. 2024 4-star. When we saw him last year, he was horrible, just thrown into the fire in a disaster situation as a young 4-star when he wasn't ready for it. If he's given the chance to develop, I think he will. Not a runner at all, pure pocket passer, took a lot of sacks. So the QB position is not the biggest concern for me. Definitely not as good as, not even in the top half of the SEC, but there are bigger concerns on the roster. At running back, they lose Demi Sumokangbai. Obviously, Trey and barely played last year, so they're both gone. And they bring in portal guys again. This has been a staple of Kentucky, going all the way back to Ray Davis. So they bring in Dante Dowdell from Nebraska and Seth McGowan from New Mexico State. Dowdell's big. He's 6'2", 225. Never actually got on the field for a full body of work. Always been a complimentary rusher. Last year, 614 yards, only 4.3 yards per carry, 7 catches. But he's a former 4-star, originally of Oregon. His main competition will be Seth McGowan. The well-traveled McGowan originally started at Oklahoma as a 4-star, but then he got into some trouble, transferred down to JUCO. Last year, he was at New Mexico State. 6'1", 220 pounds, rushed 152 times for 823 yards. That's 5.4 yards per carry, 23 catches. So you have 2 big backs who can definitely work in a lead role if needed, probably better in a committee. And that's important because they do return 2 rushers. Last year, Jamarian Wilcox actually led the team with 590 yards on 92 carries. That's 6.4 yards per carry, 3-star, but that's a great place to begin. And Patterson, Jason Patterson, that is, he had to play a little bit last year as well. The reason I think it's probably a committee, your lead rusher returning Wilcox, he's only 197 pounds, 5'10". So you're probably looking at some sort of a 3-back committee, but maybe this gets whittled down to 2 at some point. I don't think it's anything beyond that. Wide receiver is a huge concern for me. And again, just because I have a concern with the team doesn't mean it's going to be bad. Usually what this means is it requires some sort of development we haven't seen from a guy. And remember, said this at the top, I'll highlight it again now. Kentucky has been good at development. So receivers going to need some. They lose Dane Key, they lose Barian Brown. Those were 2 of their 4-stars. This isn't a team that gets a lot of them. There were also Delta Blow and True Edwards signed with the Rams. That was largely because he had some eligibility concerns. Rather than have to sit out a year like Ja'Cory Croskett-Merritt at Arizona, just decides to go and take the UDFA in the NFL. So he's not there either. They were banking on him. That leaves Jamori Macklin as the presumed number 1. He's the North Texas, Missouri transfer. Last year, he caught 13 passes, 313 yards. The field stretching's there. That's 24 yards per catch. Played in the slot 73% of the time, but his yards per route still 1.32. The good number we want is 2.0. They don't have a guy on the team that has that, at least among a full contributor. Outside of Macklin, they added a lot of other transfers. Troy Stellato, a former 4-star from Clemson's there. Kendrick Law, same thing, but from Alabama. J.J. Hester, same thing with Oklahoma. None of them have played a ton. Stellato's played the most, 38 catches, 321 yards. He's 6'1", 190. His best season came in 2023. That was where that 321-yard season was. Last year, just 264. But he's another slot receiver. 95% of the time he was in the slot, which immediately becomes redundant with Macklin. One of them has to go to the perimeter. Law, he's 5'11", 209. Caught 10 passes last year for 105 yards. He's never caught more than 15 passes in any of his 3 collegiate seasons, so very, very unproven, despite being a 3-year player with Bama and now coming over to Kentucky for his first. And then J.J. Hester from Oklahoma, he's 6'4", 202. He's also never caught more than 15 balls in a season. And probably the biggest concern with him is last year, everyone in Oklahoma got hurt, and he only managed 14 catches. So what do we have? There technically still is Fred Ferrier. He was a transfer in last year's class. Only 126 yards from him. He originally played at UAB. Luckily, Kentucky was able to coax a former 4-star Hardly Gilmore, the 4th back, after a short stint with Nebraska in the spring. He only caught 6 balls last year as a freshman, but he's at least a 4-star that's unproven. A lot of these other 4-stars are old and have had chances and haven't been able to carve something out with them. But as it stands right now, this is probably a bottom 3 wide receiver room in the SEC. But like I said, it's May 5th. Kentucky is going to probably add someone to this group from the portal. I don't really see how they could come into the season with this unless they're just going to be a 40% pass rate team and smash the ball into the O-line, which is potentially something they could do. Tight end, they ran a huge rotation last year. They're probably going to do the same this year. They have 2 of those guys back in Caddis and Willie Rodriguez. Josh Caddis and Rodriguez combined for 11 catches. Their offensive line was so bad that they needed to keep one of the tight ends to block most of the time. Caddis is 6'4", 246, block more than anything else. Rodriguez is actually the same size. He ran a few more routes, but he was still blocking most of the time. They had Henry Boyer from Illinois. He was a huge blocker. He's 6'6", 270, so he kind of a 6th offensive lineman. And then they recruited a 4-star freshman, and Michael Skinner. We'll see if he gets on the field. It's a weaker unit, but I honestly think we haven't seen the ceiling always because the O-line was so bad. Getting there. They lose 4 starters. You could frame this as a good thing to me, honestly, because those players were bad, and now they've done a lot in the portal. I think the offensive line is going to be better. Their lone returning starters, their right guard, Jalen Farmer. He began his career with Florida, but started for the first time last year. And he was one of the better blockers on the team. So bringing him back is a good place to start. Only 14 pressures allowed. Transfers are going to be the answer to this team, though, and decide whether this team has a good run game or one of the better run games in the conference. They do have some low-level transfers, though, like Shaez Pete comes over from New Mexico. He's played over 1,800 career snaps. Left tackle there. Good pass blocker. He only allowed 5 pressures last year in 6 games. Also good in the run game. I will say when you dive into where he allowed his pressures, like how his run game was, 2 worst games were against the best teams on the schedule. He's coming from Conference USA, so level of competition is a concern. But he played well enough where I think he should be at the very worst an average starter. Left guard, they have Arkansas and Florida transfer Joshua Braun. Throughout his career, he's played on both sides of the ball, largely at guard. Started the last 2 years with Arkansas. Another elite pass blocker, only allowed 8 pressures. Pretty decent in the run game as well, so that's a solid position. And then center, they add Western Kentucky transfer Evan Wimberly. He started for the first time last year, but good pass blocker. No sacks, no QB hits, just 10 pressures on 939 snaps. Slightly below average as a run blocker, so that's a little bit of a concern. But this right side of the offensive line is awesome, and I think you could even add in the left guard. They're a little better pass blocking than run blocking, which isn't the best fit for Bush Hampton, but it's still an upgrade on last year. Really, the only concern I have is right tackle. Alex Wolschlager projects to be the starter. Coming over from Bowling Green, he was a 3-year starter in the MAC. He played poorly until last year, so he's sort of a one-hit wonder. Only 17 pressures, good run blocking metrics. Perhaps he really just has developed into a solid enough player, but there's definitely players that you could look to in the depths. Yeager Burton's still there. He's played a lot, not very well, but he has experience. Malachi Wood played a lot last year as a freshman, 351 snaps. It went horrifically, but at least he's played a little bit. And then they bring in a 4-star, Darren Stray. So all this to say, the roster is better on the offensive line, banking a little bit on help. It's not super deep, but I trust this unit more than last year. So hopefully they keep Calzada upright and they can maybe release their tight end in the run game once in a while, not keep their backs in the pass block so much. And that should help their offense entirely. Defense, definitely the strength of their team last year. They lose a lot, including their top 5 edge defenders. And some of those players like J.J. Weaver, Octavius Oxendine, they're gone. Now we have to turn to the portal. They add Marquise Humphrey Grace from South Dakota, Cam Olds from Kent State, Sam Green from USC, and Lorenzo Cowan from USC. Of these players, Humphrey Grace was an FCS All-American, but better run defender, only a 1-year starter with South Dakota, and he's a senior. He was there for 3 years. What did we get in the jump from FCS to SEC? It's a question. Cameron Olds originally with Buffalo, then he started for the first time last year. That was at Kent State, 27 QB pressures. Still, MAC to SEC. And finally, our Big Ten to SEC transfers, Green and Cowan, have played almost 0. Green played 205 snaps. Cowan's never seen the field. So very inexperienced. They do have some incumbents. Gerard Smith Jr. played 52 snaps last year. He's a 4-star. Jacob Smith also played 14 snaps. He's a 4-star. So there's plenty of highly recruited players that are just inexperienced. Honestly, I think the blend of transfers and highly recruited players gives them a pretty decent floor on the edge, even though they lost a ton. Inside, they lost their top 2 defensive tackles, highlighted by Dylan Walker. Top returners are Josiah Hayes and Khalil Saunders. Hayes tore his Achilles last year after just 80 snaps, but he played 307 in 2023. He was solid when he was on the field. Saunders didn't play a ton in any specific year, but he has played 881 snaps over 4 years. He's a former 4-star, so he hasn't quite lived up to the recruiting, but in the aggregate of time he spent on the field, he actually does have some good experience. A couple transfers coming here on the interior. Jaden Williams from Wyoming, David Gusta from Washington State. Gusta has 2 years of starting experience. He's a good run defender, over 300 pounds. Williams only started 1 game for Wyoming last year, but he played quite a bit in the rotation, just wasn't one of the top 2 starters. He's a little undersized, so I think more of a depth piece at 290, but that's at least worth noting. This is a good position for them recruiting-wise. They've recruited 3 4-stars in the last 2 cycles, and Brian Robinson, Javion Campbell, and Kalen Edwards. Any one of those guys can probably play in rotation at some point this year. I think D-line's in a pretty decent spot considering all the change. They've done a good job replacing what they lost. At linebacker, they lose their top 2, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, De'Eric Jackson. That leaves just Davern Rayner, who played 82 snaps last year, but that was by choice. He only played in 4 games to preserve a year of eligibility. Formerly, he was a Northern Illinois transfer. Hasn't played a lot recently, so I think that's the biggest concern with Rayner, but he's back. Their other potential starters, I think, are either young recruits or transfers. Landon Watson, he played a lot with Marshall last year. He's a transfer. He was originally a TCU commit, but my question is he was questionable before, and then he raised his level of play against lower level competition. Now you have to go back up, but he has played quite a bit. 4-star sophomore Grant Godfrey, I think, is a candidate to potentially play over him. Only 48 snaps last year, but he's a highly recruited player. Linebacker is much weaker in terms of depth and overall high-end output compared to the defensive line, so this is the biggest concern. The secondary lost Maxwell Harrison, huge draft pick. They lost Christian Story and Zion Childress. So they have 1 full-time boundary corner returning to the team. 4-star Jonquise Hardaway, he's probably the best returner just because so much of this team is built through the portal. He was above average in coverage, 2 interceptions, 2 PBUs. His biggest concern was run support, but you love the coverage play for him. You can basically paper over run support with other parts of your defense. It's not the biggest concern for a corner. I think the second cornerback, CB, should be 4-star sophomore Terrion Nichols, only 195 snaps last year, but somehow he had 5 PBUs on that sample. That's crazy efficiency. And if it doesn't work out with him, DJ Waller Jr., he's played 210 snaps. They have a 4-star and Jansen Dunn. There's a pretty good experience at corner. Nickel, they return Alex Safari. He was a starter for a lot of the last 3 seasons, and he has played more slot than just about anyone else. It's not his main position. So he has over 1,200 snaps, 460 of those have come in the slot. Last year, he was actually in the box more than anywhere else, but they might need his versatility on the back end. They also added Kevis Thomas from Maryland, who played 289 snaps. Again, boundary corner, but they're going to have to play someone in the slot. It's an unsettled position. Maybe four-star freshman Andrew Purcell, just worth mentioning. Safety should be locked down pretty much. 405 snaps from Ty Bryant, 587 from Jordan Levitt. Bryant was a great run defender, 46 tackles on those 405 snaps, struggled in coverage, but only 10 targets, so not a ton of opportunity. Levitt's a 3-year starter, slightly above average across the board, struggled a little bit in coverage last year, 14 catches on 15 targets, but he was second on the team with 63 tackles. Some good depth here, 4 stars Cam Dooley, Martellus Carter Jr. It's an average secondary, I think, right now with the potential to be a little above average. Kicker, they have a new one, Jacob Cowie, who's never attempted a field goal in college, but allegedly reports that he can hit from 60. When I hear those things, it's more just we'll see about that. And it's a very bold claim, but yeah, there's some hype around their new kicker. It's a new position for them, so we will see. But as usual, a lot depends on the schedule for Kentucky. So let's bring you over what we've got coming up for this team this season. All right. So not an easy start. You go Toledo, then you immediately are at Ole Miss, or you play Ole Miss, it's at home. But non-conference is always weird for Kentucky because they have the rivalry in Louisville this year, but they play Louisville usually to close the year every single season. And outside of that, it's pretty easy. You got 2 MAC teams, Toledo, Eastern Michigan, and then your FCS, Tennessee Tech. So we should be looking at 3-1 non-con for this team. The problem is the SEC schedule. And they play 2 of the big boys right away, Georgia, Texas. They do dodge Alabama and Texas A&M. But the real problem I have is when you look at the bottom of this conference, they only face 1 team who's in the bottom 4, and that's Vanderbilt. So you're playing all the middling teams. Kentucky, power ranking-wise, based on this roster, is towards the lower end of this middle point as well. So when you look at how they match up against Auburn, Tennessee, South Carolina, they're going to be underdogs in most of these games unless there's some wild development that happens. Calzada reaches the ceiling, the O-line. They are able to develop continuity immediately with a bunch of transfers. They can develop these receivers that haven't been able to live up to their recruiting pedigrees at previous stops. Again, I think the defense will be the strength, but a lot is going to come down to this offense and how they can figure this out year over year, which is a big ask. There's a reason their win total is not high, and I think this team is probably a big underdog to make a bowl game. We'll see what Stoops can do. He's developed before, but tall task. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if you want to request a team, by all means. Until next time, good luck. We'll see you later.